The contemplation, then, is a contemplation of the harmoniousness of the created world. It's seeing the world not as random or as one darn thing after another. It's seeing the world as harmonious. Everything that exists for a reason. Everything that exists in interaction with everything else around it. And there is a pattern, Plato says. There is an order. There is a plan. And it's harmonious. To begin to see it as harmonious, you have to see it as musical. Harmony, then, the relationship between one thing to the next in a harmonious relationship, he says, is the first definition of justice. To be harmonious is to be justice. Is to be just. And that, see, gives a new vision into the original subject, which was justice. What is justice? Plato suggests in this study that justice is harmony. The harmonious relationship of everything to everything else is justice. He goes further then and suggests another definition of justice that emerges in the conversation. I'll suggest this before I get to Charlie here. He also suggests that justice is minding your own business. Justice is minding your own business. And for many people, this sounds strange because, of course, we think of justice as poking our nose in other people's business, making sure that everything fits together, trying to give back to people what is owed, things like that. Plato's suggesting that once you find the harmony of the world, once you see the harmony of the world, and you understand that you are part of that harmony, your business is keeping yourself in that harmony. So the business of your life is harmonizing. It's justicing, so to speak. In order to see the origin of harmony, we have to go through this process of the actual dialogue. And the dialogue takes us to the point where we can actually accept what he's suggesting. This is why going through the dialogue is important, much more than reading the cliff notes, much more than just being told what to think about it. Were he to set down his ideas in a sort of catechism way, think this, we wouldn't be led through a process that would bring us to accept what he's saying. And in some ways, we would be dismissive of what he's saying. As it is, because he's leading us towards this idea, when we get to the idea, we're far more ready to accept what he is going to suggest. It's like, in a way, being led out from darkness into light. If you're shown the light immediately, you're kind of blinded, that's repulsive, I don't want any part of that. You turn away. It's like, in a way, if you were part of chaos, and your life is a wreck, you don't see any other way and you think that's all there is. And if you're shown another way, you're like, that's too difficult, I can't do it. If you're led slowly towards order and organization, you can accept it easily. In this training of the guardians, then, there are two quotations I wanted to pass your way that are important to note. He waxes eloquent about music as mathematics, because on the one hand he says, the starting point of a man's education sets the course of what follows. It doesn't mean here that we are fated. What he's suggesting is that there's an importance to education. And by education, he doesn't, again, mean just the 4 years you spend in high school, whatever it is, or even get them early. It means that everybody, as they get older, get calcified in their ways. They get solidified in their ways. By the time you get to 20 or 30 years old, you've got a certain view. Very hard to change that view. So that if you can be educated correctly earlier on, you're more responsive. And there's more chance of your being happy, which is the real point of all this. It's to find happiness. Be drawn out of darkness into happiness. And if you can get this education early on, he says, there's more chance that you can actually become happy. Whereas if you get calcified in your ways, happiness is very elusive. Hard to train a person when they're 30 or 40 and stuck in their ways. He also brings this up in the course of conversation. He says that badness would never know virtue in itself, while virtue in an educated nature will in time gain a knowledge of both itself and badness simultaneously. It's a fundamental doctrine of Plato, that the lower knows only itself, whereas the higher knows itself and the lower. If we look again at this structure, he's saying that the normal people that are sheepish, grazing of the earth, grazing of the grass, they don't look up too much. And so all they know is the world of grass. But the sheep who looks up, the sheep who actually gazes up above the herd, sees a much larger world. And he still knows about the grass. He could go back to the grass. But he now knows that there's a difference between this and this. And so the person who is educated, who's understanding, who's comprehensive, can comprehend a world that is animalian and dark and driven by passion. He could even go back to it if he wants to. But the person who knows only a world of darkness and animal desires can't know the difference. So in the Plato's doctrine, the higher knows itself and the lower, whereas the lower only knows itself. This is why he suggests that education creates what he calls noble dogs. The term noble dogs that he uses in Book 3 is an oxymoron. It's a form of literary paradox. How are we both angels and pigs, for instance? How are we both noble and dog-like? Normally, when you couple noble and dogs together, especially in the Middle East, it doesn't look good. You call a man a dog, he's going to shoot you or pummel you or stone you to death. But he's suggesting here that our guardians have to be like noble dogs. They have to be wise, courageous, moderate, and just, is the phrase that he uses. And like dogs, they have to recognize what is good as though it were second nature, as though it were one of their own, as though it were part of them. The nature of the guardian is synonymous with goodness. They are like, you're united together. It's like separating wet from water or something. They have to be so ingrained that this guardian knows beauty and goodness when he sees it implicitly. Consequently, he says they are refined like gold in the fire. The training of a guardian, the training of somebody to become educated, to become human, really, I think, because we go back to that image of a person stretched between two extremes. The training to become human is a very difficult process. He suggests it's like gold being refined in a fire. Gold isn't just something that like falls down out of the sky. Well, strange enough, all the gold on the planet actually did fall down out of the sky because it came from a meteor. But that's in order to get gold, you have to boil the gold over intense heat, and all the impurities rise to the surface, and the gold melts, and you've got pure gold left over. The process then of refining gold in the fire is long, painful, arduous process, so much so that most people would avoid it. And yet at the end you get gold. If you wanted a person to have a mind or a soul, what he calls nous, N-O-U-S, if you want them to have a mind or a soul that's gold-like, they have to be put through the rigor of education, which is very difficult. What he calls a cutting, a lysis, like catalysis, right? Catalysis, or autolysis. It is cutting. It is like you're whipping yourself almost. This is so painful. And that pain, although it's intense, produces the soul that's gold, which really should begin to give a person a different perspective about their education. Even if they don't like biology, or they don't like physics, or they don't like math, or they don't like history, the design, as Plato sees it, of those courses is to force a person to become refined, become like gold. He suggests that this gold-like soul of the guardian is a gentleman, essentially. This is what we mean when we say gentleman. It's not just holding the door open for women. It is a person who has a strong body and a powerful mind. What the Romans called a mens sana in corpore sano. You might have heard the term. I don't know. But this gold that's produced here is itself a gentleman, the image of the gentleman. Mens sana in corpore sano, a sound mind in a sound body. Well, how do we get this education to stick? Here's where he tells what he calls the noble lie. This is in book 3. The myth of the metals. Now, what are the major myths? Because as I said, the major myths are Gyges' ring, the cave, and the myth of Ur. But this is still a pretty important myth, like the ship captain. A myth that is told in order to secure the acceptance of this education system. Myth of the metals basically goes this way. Everyone begins in the earth. We gestate down in the earth, like in the womb of Mother Earth. And while we gestate in the womb of Mother Earth, we have this metal that's infused into our veins. Either it's gold, or it's silver, or it's bronze, or iron, he says. And when we finally emerge out of the earth, when we finally are born out of the earth, we are born with that metal in our veins, and so we take to our position in the city immediately. Those who have bronze or iron take to the workers. Those who have silver take to the guardians. Those who have gold take to the rulers. The legend then is that if one class usurps a position, the city will fall. He says that the workers try to rule, the city will fall. Now, a lot of people will comment on this. Bertrand Russell, for instance, comments on this, and others comment on this and say this is very fatalistic, that what Plato's saying here is that we're all fated to do our job. Other commentators will say this is how the powerful maintain their power, by telling lies to the people. I would say neither one of those things are true. I think on the one hand what he's doing is that the noble lie, an oxymoron itself, by the way, a paradox itself, by the way, because you can't be noble and lie at the same time, is actually a way of training people to accept the structure of the soul. Because if you go back to what this myth is supposed to be doing, this myth is supposed to be supporting the structure of the city. But the structure of the city is supposed to be there to support the idea of the soul. The idea of the soul is supposed to be there to support the idea that the world is ordered and structured and not just chaotic. So it all goes back to making these guys healthy. If then we see the 3 different divisions of the city as intellect, high-spirited, and appetitive, what we're suggesting here is that if the appetite rules the person, we've got problems. If, for instance, you're driven to desire sleep all the time, you're going to be a waste of a human being. You get bed sores, you lapse into a coma eventually, you can't hold a job, blah, blah, blah. If you have the appetite ruling the body, you will eventually dissolve as a human being, or you will swell up to magnificent proportions as a human, one or the other. So the appetite, although it's important and necessary for you to stay alive, has to be governed. It can't be ruling the whole person. And that's what he's suggesting here in this myth of the metals. It is more a myth in order to get us to accept the idea that there are these divisions of the soul. Is Plato suggesting that if you're born in a lesser status, that you can't move, there's no societal fluidity? No, that's not what he's suggesting. That's how a lot of commentators take it. They take it as sort of a prescription about the whole society. It's not what it is. It is a myth that's told in order that we can easily accept the idea of the structure of the soul. Here's the bottom line. There is no division to the soul. There might not even be a soul. The divisions of soul are told in order that we can accept order and structure and rule ourselves correctly. Even the concept of soul is told so that we can have some means of discussing our high and noble actions versus our base and low actions. But when it comes down to it, there may not be anything that divides the intellect from appetite. For that matter, there may not be even a soul. It may be that both those things are a lie that is told to us in order to be able to better manage in the world. I'm not saying it is, I'm saying it may be that way. And what Plato seems to be intimating here is that this, as he calls it, noble lie, this myth, is something that we construct in order to have a language to understand our situation. But it is both lie and noble. It is paradoxically high and low connected together. If we don't believe that there's any soul at all, then what are we left with? The only thing that rules us then is that we are an automaton. We are a machine. And we do the things that the machine does as laid down by the organization of our software, so to speak, or our hardware. The hardware that is the body will force us to do certain things. We're fated to do them. The software that is our electrical impulses will drive us to do certain things. Without the concept of soul, we don't have a language to understand really that there's anything like free will, or anything like choice or future or heaven or anything like that. And so the idea of soul is created in order that we understand those things better and can operate better and can actually operate as free individuals and not as enslaved individuals. The ultimate goal of Plato is to heal his interlocutors. Their lives are dark and chaotic, like in a labyrinth. The only way to heal his interlocutors is to begin to ease them towards structure and order and pattern. He has no other way to do it. Consequently, that's what all of this goes back to over and over again. Discussions of soul, discussions of cities, discussions of order, etc., etc. It all goes back to this idea of healing his interlocutors. That's very similar, actually, to what happens even in Genesis. If we look at Genesis, the story of Genesis, it says, in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness moved on the face of the waters. It doesn't mean that God creates out of nothingness, which most people take it to mean. It means that at the beginning there wasn't nothing, there was darkness and water, chaos, the primordial elements. And God says into that darkness and water, let there be light. The darkness and water in Genesis are this area out here. They're the dark area of a human life that has no purpose, no point. It's not going anywhere. It doesn't see clearly about what is right and wrong. And in order to overcome that, in order to make a person healthy, God says, let there be light. And he begins to section off parts that will then become the world of man. He separates the waters from the waters, like this. He says, let there be dry land in the middle, like that. He says, let in that dry land be all these teeming things, which are all the different concepts that you can perceive once you begin to see order in the world. Before you see that order, it's all darkness and chaos and pointlessness and hopelessness, and you might as well jump off a bridge, which is what Polemarchus and Adeimantus and Glaucon are all at the brink of doing. In order to get them out of that, he creates this, well, in order to get us out of that, he creates this order and structure in their minds and begins slowly to move them out of that darkness and chaos towards order and structure. Which is why he doesn't give the definition of the origin of this stuff immediately. It would be like looking at a supernova. You couldn't handle it immediately. You'd have to be able to ease into it so your eyes could actually perceive it. It's like you're living in a cave, right? And you have to be drawn out of that cave slowly, otherwise you go out kicking and screaming. You still go out kicking and screaming and falling asleep anyway. But it'd be even worse if you were immediately exposed to the light. And Plato's point is that every human being is like this. All of us are kind of like living in this dark world that we have to be drawn out of. We're like living in the womb of the earth, and we have to be born out of that womb of the earth. Notice that there are a lot of connections in this story to the Ring of Gyges, too. Going down into the earth, the finding of the metal, the bronze horse, the emergence back into the real world, the usurping of someone else's place when you shouldn't usurp it, what Gyges does. And all this leads at last to Plato's suggestion that the world is based upon the chain of being, he calls it. The Pythagorean idea. It looks like this. I can't draw infinite being, by the way, so I had to draw a circle instead. Infinite being would cover a lot more on the board than I have room for, so I can't do it. Being qua being is here. And down from being itself, at the very bottom, there's nothingness. The loss of being. It's not a something itself. nothingness is a deprivation. It's a loss of being rather than a thing. You can't have absolute evil. The movie's like, oh, he's evil incarnate. He's absolute evil. That's a load on movie. You can't have absolute evil. It wouldn't exist. It wouldn't be there at all. Nothingness is a deprivation rather than a something. And what Plato suggests is that between being and nothingness, there is everything else that's created. The entire created world that exists is somewhere on that chain between being and nothingness. And it's either moving towards greater being or moving towards nothingness. And the lives of every human person are on that chain somewhere, either moving towards greater being and understanding and knowledge and light and holiness, or moving away from it into the dark and the absolute disintegration of their lives. Which then leads us up to the next book. There's a lot of stuff there. Let me pause for a minute and see if you had any questions on any of it. It's a lot to handle at once. That's why they don't give it to you all at once. They just send you to Mass on Sunday. Because Mass is the physical incarnation of this whole philosophical system.